Hey everybody, I'm Anna McEwen. And now for Bob Switzer with the Epic Narrative.
Well, everyone, welcome back to the Epic Narrative. We have a new adventure with us today. What is that? I am alone with a 4-month-old puppy named Zacapa. He's an adorable long-haired mini dachshund, and honestly a very good boy, generally speaking. I mean, he's a puppy, so my expectations are not perfection, and he nails my expectations. So I might seem a little distracted today, but I have to learn how to do this with him in the room, and he needs to learn how to behave while I'm doing this. So here we go. The main thing is he hides slightly under the bed cover, and then I don't know what he's doing down there. Anyway, here we go. All right, so it's that section of the book of Exodus where we are going to get incredible detail regarding the tabernacle and its construction and every little nuance of every little thing that's going into that construction and what it's going to look like and what material it's going to be made of. And he knows I'm distracted. Sorry, that was a long pause because I was like, that little bugger, he went right after the shoes. He's like, Dad's talking. I know what that means. Freedom. So when I started reading, reading, and I thought, what's the story? What's the story of the tabernacle? What are we going after here, God? It's like there's incredible books, volumes of books that have been written regarding the nuances of every material used and the design, the carvings, it's beautiful, and I thought I can't do that. I'm just not wired that way. So I sat with it. I really did. I sat with it, and much like the law, where the Lord, ultimately gave me for me in this, medium that I'm using here, He gave me the reminder: love God, love people. That's the law. That's everything summed up in a couple phrases. So we've looked at the law from that perspective, and we never want to forget that perspective whenever we look at, quote, the law. And anything that looks like you have to hate people or people die if they don't agree with you, that's something that needs to be addressed, not the law. So when it comes to the tabernacle, what the Lord showed me for this medium, and I'm not saying that this is the only way to look at this. I'm not. And I'm not even going to say that I'm 100% right, because I'm probably not. I just know I'm involved in this. And once I get involved in things, just like any translation, any translator, any preacher, you just can't get yourself out of the way, and that's okay. God's okay. He's okay. You're okay. We're all going to be okay. The bottom line is we're going to study, we're going to talk, we're going to communicate, and ultimately we are all seeking God and His kingdom. And when we do that first, everything else will fall into place. So for me, the perspective on this, the tabernacle is a place for connection. That's all it was. It was a physical activity to remind everyone of the covenant that God made with them. The rituals were not a relationship, right? Oh, man. Rituals are not relationships. Yeah, and this goes like to everyday life, not just with God, but how many of us have seen or been around relationships, let's say marital ones, where they just do the same routine every single day, but they don't feel close to each other. And I've had situations where, a spouse has come and said, I want a divorce. I can't take it anymore. And the spouse is completely shocked because in their minds, they've done everything they're supposed to do. I go to work every day. In this particular case, this is the man. He's like, I go to work every day. I bring home the money. I bought a nice house. We live on the land. It's like, I don't understand what went wrong. Why doesn't she want to live with me? Because in his mind, that particular guy, and I think generally a lot of times people do this, the ritual of life for him had taken the place of relationship, and finally the wife was like, wait a minute, we're not in a relationship. We're housemates. We're going through the motions of raising kids and work and kids and work and kids, and we've been distracted for years, but we're not loving each other. And that's the essence of the tabernacle. It was designed to remind people of relationship. I mean, that's what doing life together is about, is to remind you that you are in a relationship with somebody. The ritual is not supposed to replace it. Going out to eat, going, quote, on dates. What's the difference? The difference is when you date your spouse, you're in a relationship. Like the emphasis is, hey, I'm in love with you. When you just go out to eat, you're just sustaining yourself. Well, depending on what you're eating, you may be poisoning yourself, but that's another whole subject. So the temple, the tabernacle, that's our framework. That's our main filter we're going to go through. That first, it's a reminder of what they have available to them in relationship with God. And two, the law is to remind them to love God and love people. And really that first commandment is really a command to worship. It's really a command to focus on God, because he knows if you become like me, the tabernacle is going to become useless, because I don't need this. You need it. Hear me on that. The tabernacle was not put together so that God could feel better about himself. It was so that the people would have an on-ramp to a deeper relationship. They needed this practice. They needed to practice being in close relationship with God. That's what they needed. And God understood that. Why? Because he loves his people. He's like, I know. All right. You know, the whole meltdown at the mountaintop. I understand. I still love you. That's never going to change. So let's work on this. How can we work on this? And very similarly, people that have grown apart, you put up boundaries. You put up, we'll call them, if you want, you can call them rules. And you say, just to demonstrate to one another that you still care and love for one another, and you can build trust between one another, we're going to set up these boundaries. Obey the boundaries, work within the boundaries, and the boundaries can be expanded, and ultimately the boundaries will all be dropped, because love will have won. Love will have ultimately pushed away all the boundaries, because love brings about a level of trust and intimacy that allows you to fully cooperate with one another and integrate into each other's lives without having to be told what to do, and without having to hold back who you are. It's total freedom. The tabernacle was designed to bring that type of relationship. Oh, man, the covenant of the covenant relationship, or the commitment of the covenant relationship, is seen in this tabernacle. Okay, it was not just each other, but it was toward the ultimate goal, to further the family, to expand the kingdom. The expansion comes through intimacy. Yeah, very much like marriage, yes. You expand your family through intimacy. That's what was supposed to move from generation to generation, that covenant relational connection. Now remember, the tabernacle was a way for people to do that, and it didn't help God at all. People wanted a separation between them and God. They needed the opportunity to build trust between them and God. In a lot of ways, what the people wanted was a contract with God, not a covenant with God. And I do think a lot of marriages enter into more of a contract situation than they do a covenant situation. Okay, side note. He really is a good puppy. He's like all curled up, just napping right here at my feet. He gave up all the chewing and rambunctious little impiness that he has. And oh my gosh, if you could see him now. All right. Well, you can. I mean, even now, if you want, you can go to his Instagram page called Zakapi Makes Me Happy. All one word. Zakapi Makes Me Happy. And you'll see a lot of pictures of him. He's adorable. So I think a lot of people are in a contract, not a covenant relationship. Now, contracts are by their very essence, they're loveless. They're relationshipless by nature. You can't have a contract and a relationship. Now, a lot of people have relationships with people that they have relationships with, but I'll tell you this: many times the relationships begin to suffer, and ultimately, they ultimately usually I should say, not ultimately, they usually fall apart. When you're in contract with somebody who you think, well, I can trust them. We can sign this agreement. Everything will be fine. Sometimes that works out fine. Most of the time, the relationship begins to suffer because the contract, by its very nature, is relationshipless. It pulls it out. And these people that these ultra rich people that sign these premarital agreements, prenuptial contracts, right? So that they immediately start the relationship with a mindset that says this probably isn't going to work long term. So to protect who? To protect myself. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, and I mean to protect you, but really me. But to protect each other, let's lay out what the divorce would look like now. It's naturally non-relational. The focus on a contract is what could go wrong. When you write up a contract, you don't write it up in the positive. You write up the basic statement. We agree to this, but should the party below, I mean, there's a lot of legalese, but basically you say, if they don't adhere to these conditions, the contract's up. If I don't adhere to these conditions, the contract's up. You're naturally wired now to look for the negative. Sometimes you'll write in there, well, we can renegotiate. And every change of circumstance or negative behavior brings us back to the table to say, okay, now what are we going to do? And I've seen this play out. And again, we'll keep it within the marriage relationship. So many divorces, right? Divorces officially move from a covenant relationship to a contractual relationship. You agree to have the kids during this time. You agree to pay this amount. I agree to have the kids during this time. I agree to provide, whatever the housing and it goes on, and it's a contract. And then what do? Every time that contract is broken, in essence, you go back to court. And the goal of a contract is to take as much as possible from the other people while paying the least amount possible on your end. That's just what happens. You don't enter into a contract saying, man, I can't wait to lose money on this. You enter into a contract saying, what's the most I can get for the least amount of effort? Which again is not a loving relationship. By its very nature, it's a negative-based relationship. You look at all kinds of sports contracts that go on, and you think, well, I signed a 5-year contract for $50 million. Then what happens? Like literally the next year, the next year. They're renegotiating. Why? Well, they didn't hold up their end of the bargain, or I overperformed. They were paying me for this, but I did way more than that. I deserve more than that. It's right. I know I'm probably just really beating this over your head, but you can see how a contractual mindset destroys relationship. It requires lawyers and judges. It's unhealthy. It's unhelpful in trying to get people together. The flip side of that, covenant by design has love between the parties. By design, covenant says, I love you. I'm bringing everything of mine to the table and giving it to you. Now, usually covenants would start out highly relational, and then, and I mean, there were ways to break the covenant. I'll get into that in a minute, but the covenant was designed to say, maybe you didn't, the first round of covenant, you didn't necessarily bring everything to the table, but let's say it was your merchandise. I'm bringing to the table all my flocks, and we are gonna, and you're bringing to the table all of your flocks, and we are going to work together to double, triple, quadruple our flocks, because now this is our families and our families' inheritances, and we are working to maintain and to grow what we currently have together. And if we lose, we all lose. I don't just take mine and go home. That's a contract. If we lose everything together, because we are in this together. Contracts carry just this internal dissatisfaction as each party wants the best deal, but is always looking for what is broken or missed so that a new contract can be written up. Right? Laban did this to Jacob, and we went over that last season in the book of Genesis. He renegotiated the contract 10 times in 7 years. 10 times. He changed the contract because he kept seeing that Jacob had the favor of God, and Jacob kept getting the better end of the deal, and he would change the contract because they were not in a covenant together. All right. Covenants are common, is a common pursuit of the highest ideal. It naturally draws the parties together, and it deepens relationship. It deepens the relationship as more and more of the common good is acquired and is pursued. That's what happens in a covenant. Common good pursued together. I'm looking out for your best interest, because if whatever good happens to you is going to be best for you, and we're in this together. And then the other side is thinking the same thing toward you. They're going to do what's best in your interest because they want the very best for you. It's a beautiful thing. Contracts break when one party changes the pursuit, right? But contracts are broken. I mean, contracts are broken. Somebody broke the rules. Somebody didn't follow through on their agreement, so the contract's over. We need to renegotiate. Covenants are only broken when one of the two parties says, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to work with you anymore. I'm going to... Now, they couldn't take what they had brought into the covenant. They just had to walk away. So it was a major loss. If you were in covenant and you walked away from that covenant, you walked away with nothing of what you brought into it. Otherwise, you would have had a contract. But in a covenant, that's part of the commitment is everything here that I bring to the table is now yours. If I break the covenant, I leave all this behind. That's why God says, I'm taking both ends of this. This covenant cannot be broken because I'm taking up both ends of it. Remember, he made that very clear to Abraham. This will last forever. I can't break it. That's why this is one of the reasons why I get a little frustrated when a preacher or a teacher, and I know they say this, and I know they're wonderful people, and I don't argue with them because I love them, and I don't think it's something I'm going to, again, get in a fight over. But they'll talk about, well, God destroyed the first covenant. It's like, well, you can't destroy who he is. He covered both ends of that covenant. He's still covering it. And I don't believe God, breaks the first covenant when Jesus brings the second covenant. God doesn't change his purpose in the second covenant. The first covenant was to do what? Was to create a nation that would draw all nations to God. The second covenant is, I'm going to create a people worldwide that will draw all men to God. The greater purpose, the higher purpose is the same, and the character of the person who covers both ends of the covenant is the same. It's God. He hasn't changed. His desire is to have a loving, intimate relationship with everyone in his creation. That was true in the first covenant, and he wanted to do it through a nation called Israel. And it was true in the second covenant when he said, I want to do it through a people that believe in me. I don't care what nation you're from. We are going to impact the world with the kingdom of God. That high purpose has never changed in either covenant. The second covenant only overtakes the first covenant, or, quote, destroys it, abolishes it, because it expands it and advances it by removing any system of sacrifice that was designed by the tabernacle. He's like, let's just do away with this whole thing because you guys have turned this system of sacrifice that was supposed to invite people into intimacy. You've turned it into a religious practice that actually keeps people away from me. And this is what was the passion of Jesus when he was in the temple. This is the passion of Jesus when he was in the temple. He was not trying to destroy the money changers. And again, I know I've hit it before, but the flipping of the tables, that the nuances of that word can either be violent or calm. And when the marketplace, if you went by a stall, a booth, thank you. The booth, if the booth's table was flipped, the table would be flipped inward. It meant that booth was closed and not open for business. So when Jesus, quote, flipped the tables, he could have done it very gently and just shut down the marketplace, because he's like, listen, guys, I'm going to be teaching here for a while. We're actually going to move all of your goods out into the main street, all your animals, everything, and I'll help you do it. And he made his own little whip, and he moved the animals out. There's no violence necessary. And rabbis did this all the time, multiple times a month. They would teach the Gentiles in the marketplace. Sometimes they shut down the whole marketplace. Sometimes they just closed it for a little while and left the animals where they were. And what did Jesus do? He's like, listen, you have turned my system that was designed to draw you closer to me and invite the other nations to me. You've turned it into a den of thieves. You are stealing and robbing from people, not their money. You're stealing from them the opportunity to be with me. I'm here. Jesus is here to shut this down. I'm going to be the final sacrifice. And all sacrifices are over at this point. And from that point on, from my death and resurrection on, it's everybody can come to me. They don't need to come here anymore. He was shutting down a system. He wasn't shutting down the money changers. Come on. That's a short version. I have a long version as a bonus episode in season 1, and I think it's at I think my messages are still up on Faith Worship Center in Pepperell, Massachusetts. I think they still have my messages there. You can look it up on their website. It's in there somewhere too. let's see. So the first and second covenant. Sorry, no. I forgot to find my notes. I went way down that rabbit trail, way further than I wanted to. Okay, sacrifice was designed to invite intimacy and turned into a religious practice to keep people from God. You separated God from everyday life. You made it seem like if you don't do this, God will kill you. That's a lie. Jesus said, God won't kill you ever. God's character and his purpose for creation remains unchanged from creation. His desire is to watch all of creation enter into its original identity, purpose, and destiny in the kingdom. That's the higher purpose of both covenants. That's the point of the tabernacle. It's to point people to the covenant, to point people to God. We walk away from the covenant because when and if we walk away from the covenant, it doesn't change. It remains. Why? Because God's covering both ends of the covenant so that we can enter back into the full benefits of everything God has to offer. Honestly, most churches have turned the second covenant into its own religion, just like the Hebrews did with the first covenant. They turned it into a list of demands, a set of behaviors of obedience to rituals that will please God and bring about some sort of blessing. And preachers, in doing that, preachers have set themselves up as the final authority in that behavioral modificational techniques, in the psychology of the whole thing, in the theology of the whole thing. You have to obey the preacher or whoever the denominational head is, or whoever wrote the book at the seminary, whatever. It's a hierarchical system. Jesus didn't want to set up a hierarchical system. God did not want to set up a hierarchical system. He wanted to set up a place of community. He set up this place where you come every whatever and you give a sacrifice because it's supposed to remind you just how much God loves you and the fact that he does make things right. It's supposed to remind you that you have a connection to him, that he's with you 24 hours a day. You can watch him and see him. He's above the temple in a pillar of cloud and fire. He's in the temple in the smoke and mist of the Holy of Holies. He's in everything that we read over these next few chapters. Every detail that goes into this because he's like, you need to think of me when you see this. You need to think of me when you see this. You need to think of me. And I've told you, people have written entire volumes on how much all of this means and why it means what it means and what's it supposed to do. Always point us to God, not separate us from him if we don't obey. It's supposed to pull us closer to him. I mean, the whole offering thing, right? The call for the offerings at the front end of chapter 25. Are you willing to invest in this relationship? God's like, listen, if this is the route we're going, you need an on-ramp. So the first thing we do is we just give you an opportunity to invest. Now, I know a lot of preachers love this part, right? You need to invest. You need to invest. Bring all your money to the storehouses because we need your money. And then from here, we will distribute the money. We will support the missionaries. We will provide benevolent funds. We will provide a food storehouse for those that are in need. We will. Again, creating a hierarchy. It's easy to do because it's very intoxicating to be on the top of a pyramid. It's very intoxicating to be the one on stage that everyone is designed to sit and stare at and listen to. The offering was, again, an invitation. Will you invest in this relationship? Because where your heart is, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. God doesn't need your treasures. He knows what it will picture if you do it. And again, so many times when you're in a relationship and it's falling apart and you're thinking, what just happened? One of the things you can do is you start to say to each other, all right, how can we invest in this relationship? And one of the ways a lot of times people do it is they invest in counseling. Because, well, frankly, counseling can be really, really expensive. But, I mean, not with me, because I'm not really a counselor. I just talk to people about relationships. But It can get really expensive. But that's just the first step. I mean, there's people that are, that have invested in counseling. They've been in counseling for 3, 4, 5 years. Nothing's changed. Why? Because counseling doesn't make it happen. The offering doesn't make the relationship. It's an opportunity for you to feel closer. It's an opportunity for your heart to start to be moved toward the thing or the one that you're investing in. That's all this offering is designed to do. It's an on-ramp. Are you willing to invest? And the people were. They invested a lot. But again, many churches have turned the offering into a ritual, not a relational opportunity. And they'll call they'll call their ritual, they'll say, well, this is because of what? Because of love, because of Jesus. You need to obey these rules. You need to set these behaviors as your standard because God loves you. And it's available to all men through Jesus. But because really they've misinterpreted the whole Jesus in the temple and does God kill and even the story of Ananias and Sapphira, which again I preached on a couple times. I don't think I've done a bonus episode on it, but when you look into it, I don't believe that God killed them. I think God honored what he gave to his apostles, which was the authority of life and death in the tongue. And we all have that. I covered it somewhere. It might have been in the first season, but I covered it in extensively. But the power of life and death is in the tongue. And if he takes that from us, if he says, well, you didn't use that power accordingly, I'm going to take it back. I'm not going to let you have the power of life and death because you keep killing people, then he never gave it to us. It was never freedom. It was never love. And God is love. Why do bad things happen in this world? I think a lot of times because those who represent God on this earth, have used the power that he's given us to bring about death and destruction because we think that's how God behaves. And the church, generally speaking, has preached this a lot. So as we look at the temple and we look at the law, we need to keep these things in mind. God is love, and he never changes. God is good, and he always has been and always will be. And the covenant is about the purpose, higher purpose, and character of God. The laws are set up. They're set up as a workable daily life practices for a slave nation to learn how to live as sons of God. And they have their leader, Moses, who knows how to live his royalty. He's showing them. Every time he goes up into the mountain, he's showing them, you have this available. You've turned your back on it. That's okay. You can unturn your back. God is not the one who's not available here. You're the one who's made God unavailable. You've turned your back on him. The law set up a workable daily routine for the slaves to learn how to live as people who God loves. The temple was an invitation for personal, intimate, daily, relational connection with God. Not just any God, a God who is for them, who would never leave them, never forsake them, a God who would not allow their behavior to impact his behavior or his love for them. And that was a really strange God in this culture of the world. This whole idea, very, very strange. And we're I'm gonna wrap things up now. We're gonna take a look at this chapter again the next episode, because there's more I think we need to draw as a framework for the tabernacle, so that we start to change the way that we've been told that this thing, by many people we've been told the way this thing was designed to do. So many people believe it was designed to force people into a ritual, and it wasn't. I also want to note the last verse of chapter 25 is something to also keep in mind. He's like, God says to Moses, do all these things, and I mean, it's detailed, and he goes, make sure it's just like I showed you on the mountain. So when Moses is up in the cloud, like he not only is getting the law, he's literally living in the tabernacle at times, like walking through the details. God's like, okay, this is the way I want the posts to look. Look at this, Moses. Watch this. Watch how I want the top design. Watch how I want the gold to be laid. Watch how I want. I mean, it had to be fascinating for Moses because it's real. There's nothing more real than heaven. That's where, quote, our real world came from in the beginning, out from the beginning. It's a beautiful thing. So the whole time Moses is writing down the words of God, he also has a visual of what it looked like when he was there. And as you follow along, I'll just mention it here, but I'll probably mention it again. He's seen it. He's heard it. He's now, he's written about it, but he did not do the work. He let other workmen, craftsmen. The Bible says that these guys were moved by God in their skills. So they were wise, creative people. And Moses gave them the freedom of expression of the tabernacle and the details that God gave him. He's like, take this and run with it. Fascinating leader. Moses really, really was. I think he fights being a Pharaoh. He fights it because that's the culture of that he grew up in. But man, he does some amazing things to really release and empower people to do what he knows needs to be done, and yet he lets them go about it. He's a wonderful leader. All right, sorry. Maybe more on that as we go forward. I'll see you next week on the Epic Narrative.
Don't go anywhere. We've got Bob Thoughts.
Well, I'm pretty sure everybody just needs an update right now because lots have changed. Now, when I was recording this, it was a while ago, actually, because as you know, if you follow me, you know that I do all my recordings in advance, and then I send them all to my producer. Well, technically, I give them access to the file, and then we roll them out every week. And we do this because it helps me maintain kind of the flow of whatever it is that I'm thinking at the time. But enough about that. So back in the day when I was recording Exodus, we were in Texas, and that's where we got Zacapa. And now it's 40-something weeks later. It's almost a year later, and here he is. He's still with us. I have to tell you something. He doesn't like to know this, but he's a thoroughbred mini doxy, which means he should be 8 to 10 pounds at the most, right? He's handsome, and he's a lot of fun. We love him, we really do. But the dude doubled that. He's like 20 pounds, and he's not like fat. He's just turned into what's called a standard dachshund. Now there's tweenies that run in the 12 to 14 pound range, 16 pound range, somewhere in there. We've had a couple of those in our lives as well, but this guy is the biggest dachshund we've ever had. And I found out something along the way because we were like, oh my gosh, this thing keeps growing. And we're not like feeding him, this massive amount of food. But it turns out the dachshunds, despite their genetics, how clean their genetics are. I mean, his mini dachshund, line goes back for generations. But dachshunds are the only breed that you don't know exactly how big they're going to be for a year. Like, even though you buy a mini, it still could be a standard. You could buy a tweenie and it could turn into a mini. Like, you don't know what they're going to be. It takes about a year for you to actually figure that out. And we figured it out. He's a big handsome boy. Yes, he is. He's staring at me. He's a sweet dog. Anyways, that's an update on Zacapa. And yeah, he still has his Instagram page. I don't know how often things get posted there anymore. But anyways, you can see pictures of him. If you follow me on Facebook, mostly I post him on my story. I don't necessarily post photos of him on my timeline, but that's that. And then, I listened to this. I think I did sound pretty distracted. A lot of pauses and kind of the stuttering of sentences. So I'm sorry about that. Probably was one of the least entertaining. And I really got off on the covenant stuff. And when I listened to it, sometimes I think I had more in my brain that was coming than what was coming out of my mouth. And I was trying to condense what was in my brain at the time, because I didn't necessarily think I was going to go down the line of covenant. So I wasn't sure. So that's, again, kind of makes me stutter, slow things down, try to gain my thoughts and put them out in a succinct way. But I think you got the picture. Covenant doesn't change character. And for many people, I think that they put in the character of God things that aren't in the life of Jesus. And if you don't use Jesus as your number one first filter that you run everything through, then I think you're headed down a path that could lead to a lot of trouble. So we can get more into that maybe some other time. It's a pretty big subject for sure, the finished work of Christ and Jesus's perfect theology. I'd recommend where I was the other day, a few weeks ago, Rethinking God with Tacos. They have a great podcast that really focuses on that concept of the finished work of Christ and the grace of God and the goodness of God. So yeah, I'd recommend their podcast if you really want like teaching on it and understanding. They have excellent theologians that come through: Baxter Kruger, John Crowder, that sort of thing. But those sort of people, that sort of thing. Anyway, the other update I want to give you is, by the time you hear this, we will be in a new location. We're going to go back to Florida for the summer. We picked up another job at an RV camp in exchange for a little bit of an hourly wage and our site and electricity, all our utilities and cable and Wi-Fi and all that. We work, which is a good deal when you're on the road. And so we're going to work at a little place called Sugarloaf Key, which is right next to Key West. So we'll be down in the Florida Keys, which is something we've literally always talked about, living and working on a tropical island. We just always thought that would be fun. And we really believe the Lord opened up this opportunity for us to go there, because he remembered. I mean, there was no way we could ever afford to live on an island. Like, that just wasn't going to happen. At least we didn't see a way for it, and the Lord did. He's like, I know a way, and boom. I mean, I can give you the details of how we found the job. It just was a God thing. Suddenly, as we sometimes call them, just suddenly opened up, boom. So we're headed down there. We'll be there for a season. We'll see what happens. Still trusting God for, a long-term opportunity somewhere. And a place where we really are integrated, using our experience and our gifts in a manner that we believe we've been designed to do it, which is really in ministry. But anyway, that's enough about me. Keep us in prayer. And if you want to come to the Florida Keys, come on down. Come on down, the KOA on Sugarloaf Key, and look us up. Have a great day, everyone.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, you can subscribe to this podcast on any platform you use. You can also reach out to Bob for questions or booking at thebobswitzer.com or email him at thebobswitzer@gmail.com. See you next week, guys.